My guest this week is actually a good friend of mine. I call her Souk. Everybody knows her as Christy Soukhamneut. And Christy, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Ken. It was great to see you in person last week and fun to hang out now on camera.
Yeah, it's always so good to see you. I have to say, just kind of by way of introduction, I don't normally introduce people on this. I just kind of say the name and we keep going. But I have to tell people about you because when I describe you or when I talk about who you are to people, the description I give is, this is one of the smartest people I've met in the mortgage industry. And that's the first thing I say about you. And I always wonder what people say about me, but that's what I say about you, because you really are like, you are at the top level of, you've been at the top level of a lot of decisions that have been made in the mortgage industry. You have driven a lot of those decisions. You have the knowledge of frontline sales. You have the knowledge of the secondary market, how that all works, and how loans are traded. But there's nothing, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is nothing you don't want to know more about and that you're not afraid to go dive in and learn. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say. I thought you were going to say there was nothing I didn't know, but I was going to say, whoa, that's not true.
There's always more to know.
There's always more to know. So by the way, if you want to know how I introduce you,
I do.
This is the coolest guy that I know in the mortgage industry, because he is focused on creating compliance training that loan officers want to binge watch. And if anybody can tackle that,
yeah,
you know they have to be cool.
Oh, that's cool. It's funny when I speak on other things, I'm like, oh, the other stuff's easy. Like taking the thick stuff and delivering it in that way that's the part that takes a special craft. So I appreciate that you say that. That's awesome. Back to you. Okay. Take me back. First of all, you're one of the strongest, most powerful women in the mortgage industry. So not just one of the smartest humans I know, but also one of the most powerful and smart women in the industry. And we're going to get into that a little bit. But first, how did you get into the industry originally? Because you were in the 80s, right?
Late 80s, I started, my first job in the industry was working for an appraisal firm. And one of my friends at school, while I was in high school, said, hey, I've got to quit my job. They need somebody to replace me. I work at this appraisal firm. It's a great lady. Want to do it? And so I said, yes. I mean, who doesn't need an after school job? Yeah. And it was a lot of really good experience because, as you know, appraisers back in the 80s worked a lot like they do today. You have to have the training and go to the appraisal institute. And so you have to really get in with somebody. And it was a very, very interesting field to go and work for. And in fact, I worked for a female. Her name was Lee. She was a wonderful human. She worked out of her attic, and it was her sole proprietor. You know, a lot of filing, believe it or not, we actually wrote sales on index cards and filed them away, and then had to clean that out every couple of months so that you had the most recent up-to-date sales lists. MLS didn't exist. And I switched over to the mortgage side right after I graduated from college. My dad was actually building a house and had his loan. We won't say with who, it's a company that doesn't exist anymore, but had his loan paperwork there. His loan officer left and went to another company, called my dad and said, do you want me to take your paperwork with me? And my dad said, no, kind of like the company that you were with, I'll stay there. He said, fine. My dad called back. They had lost his paperwork. He was doing new construction. And when he got finished building the house, they didn't have his paperwork. And he was very, very upset with the whole process. Had an extremely unfortunate experience. And then what he decided was he was going to open a mortgage company to close his own personal loan. So he found out who the investors were, called them up and said, I want to open a mortgage company. And they were like, great, you got some experience? He goes, no, none. They helped him find a company to close his loan that would do what they needed to do. Close the loan. He said, well, I'm still interested in owning a mortgage company. The process sounds fascinating. And they were like, yeah, call us back in a year. A year later was when I was graduating from college, and my dad called back and said, hey, my daughter's graduating from college. She definitely needs a good job. Mortgage company seems like a good thing. I'm ready to open it. And the warehouse and TPO rep said, well, great. You got some experience? He said, no, you didn't say anything about experience. She said, call you back in a year. My dad is a really good salesperson because she came over and trained me. The only thing I knew about mortgages was real estate appraising. I hadn't even purchased a house myself at that particular point in time when we started and kicked this off. So my first job was owning a broker shop, being CEO of a mortgage company in partnership with my dad.
At how old?
This was in the summer of we won't talk about what year, but early 90s. And I was 20 years old.
Wow. So you jumped in early. You were a CEO at 20 of a broker shop, and your dad was he working on the business?
He did not. He owned a bunch of other companies and had a full-time job, the side hustle. He gave me some really powerful advice. He said, look, it's hard for families to be in business together. It's hard for friends to be in business together. I don't want to ruin our relationship. So here's the deal. I put the capital into this company, everything that I'm going to put in there. I expect a return on my capital. Here's what that looks like for me. I am available for any advice, questions, whatever you have. You can ask me anything except for more money. You just go figure out how to run a business. It was amazing. I sat in an office. He had an office building that he owned. I sat in that office building. My uncle, who was running another company, was right down the hall. So I had my uncle and my dad, and they shared so much wisdom. If you can imagine being able to be involved in an organization where you have the catbird seat to see all the financials and see what's going on and work with auditors. And everybody we hired was smarter than I was because they'd been in the business. The loan officers knew more than I did. The processors knew more than I did. Heck, I'm pretty sure the receptionists knew more than I did. With everything that we're doing, it was an interesting experience because I can remember, you got to think about the timeline that this was, early 90s. This was also not a great time to be in the mortgage business. Rates had come down from the double digits they were in the late 80s. They'd had a big refi boom. And then by 1994, rates were back up, and it was a market not dissimilar to where we are today. But the business itself was very different with the way that auditors treated you and the regulators, and in some cases, how unregulated we were compared to today. And so how the business operated was different, but the environment was different. I can remember coming into the office one day, working with a client who said, I need to speak to the man in charge. Oh. I'm like, but there is no man. Like, it's me. Like, this is all you got. And he didn't believe me. He's like, no, little lady. This is the South. No, little lady, that can't be you. I literally walked down the hall, grabbed my uncle who worked for another organization and said, hey, here's what's going on. He came in and had a conversation where basically he asked every question to me. I answered every question, but the guy left happy because he got to talk to a man.
Jeez.
1994, a little different than today.
How do you even deal with that? Like, do you remember the process in your head that told you still that you're worth it, or that you are valued? This guy's a tool?
Oh, mad. You go through those angry feelings, and then you realize they're just, to your point, they're just not worth it. These experiences happen over and over. And I know that I am not alone as a female leader, or even a female in any part of the industry where that occurred during that period. And sometimes even more recently for folks. Not everybody's a nice human. You just got to get those folks out of your life.
Yeah. So wow. I didn't know you started that young and in a leadership role. You've been leading your basically entire work life.
I have. It's a gift. Like, it is a gift to have people who have confidence in you. I did an interview at one point, and I shared, the person that impacted me the most was my dad. My grandmother owned businesses, and we can get into that and what she went through as a woman and with a husband who passed away unexpectedly, being shoved into running businesses with only a 10th grade education and 7 children. Right? Didn't even have a driver's license. Obviously an inspiration to who I am today as I got to know her over my growing up period. But one of the things the gift my dad gave me was, he always told me I could be anything I wanted. And in a way where he would take me to business meetings, teach me how to read contracts. This is 10, 12, 13 years old. He's including me and helping me understand how the world works, introducing me to CEOs and other senior leaders in our city. And so having a confidence when you're that young to be able to sit in meetings with those people, understand what's going on, have somebody explain it to you and let you believe in yourself and what you can accomplish is highly valuable. I think it's the best gift that we can give to another human.
So you just believed. He taught you to believe. And he taught you that
He
you
taught me
belong
to
in the
believe.
room. So you knew you belonged in a room because he brought you into those rooms early and gave you that exposure.
Absolutely. And I realized that that is different than a lot of people out there. They didn't either have the same role models that I was able to have or have the same experiences. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be mentoring people and trying to give them those experiences or share that wisdom. I know that's something that you do when you go down to the orphanages. You're giving those kids an experience that they wouldn't otherwise have because they're exposed to someone like you who has the heart and soul that you have and the business wisdom and acumen.
Yeah. So you carry it from there. You grow the mortgage company. What happens next?
I have a baby. And so 3 years later, get pregnant with my first child. And quite unexpectedly, we weren't planning on having kids. So surprise, God, you make plans, God laughs. And my husband got relocated to Georgia at the same time. We were in Alabama, gets relocated. I'm a good Southern girl, decided I should be a stay-at-home mom. So sold the business, moved over to Georgia, bought a new house, brand new construction, moved in, made all new shower curtains from scratch, all new window treatments, repainted the kitchen, reorganized the kitchen. That was week 1. Second week, I went to my husband's office and organized his office, then organized their break room, then started organizing his boss's office, who politely told me that he didn't know where I was going tomorrow, but it wasn't here. Maybe I should think about getting a job.
Oh, no.
So I pick up the phone. I'm brand new in town. We've literally been there for 2 weeks. Open the phone book, first bank that comes up in the directory. I pick up the phone and call them and said, hey, do you have any job openings? They said, let us get you to human resources, talk to human resources. And the guy says, well, what do you do? And I said, well, for the last 3 years, I've been originating loans. He goes, can you come in today? I said, I have a kid, no daycare. We just moved here. And he's like, bring the kid. Walked out of there with a job, which is the first lesson that I learned about how valuable this industry is with staff and personnel. People that know what they're doing can always land a good role here. And I know that we are in a time where a lot of folks get discouraged, but there's a lot of skill that goes into what we do as originators and what we do on the mortgage side. And being able to showcase those skills and understand the value that you bring to an organization is essential and key. So got back in the industry. I think I had just like 2 weeks off.
Oh my gosh.
With not doing anything.
Do you remember that interview with the baby with you?
I do.
Was that's got to be tough.
But you talk about the confidence level that my dad gave me of I can conquer anything. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. You go in with confidence, the baby and the pacifier, and these are just the circumstances you're dealing with. Interestingly enough, originating loans, how many times was I holding a baby, not my baby, somebody else's, and taking their loan application or help them do documents. And those skills are adaptable. The skills that you have as a mother are valuable to an organization. I have done the same thing for my children. Many of the realtors that I partnered with over the years can tell you the number of times that I brought my kids, baby on a hip, coming into meetings and to different events and functions and including them as part of the experience.
Which is what your dad did for you.
That's exactly what he did for me.
Wow. So fast forward now from that moment there, you started that bank in Georgia. Was that in Savannah?
No, it was in North Georgia in Dalton. I worked for what is now Synovus.
Okay. So take me from there to where you were with your chief of staff position. Like, are you just like grinding it out the whole way? Are there dips and valleys and peaks?
I think there are always dips and valleys, and it's recognizing what those are. I wouldn't be here without some of the negative experiences that I went through. Like a top producer that worked with me saying he didn't want to work with me anymore. And another top producer that I worked with saying, look, I think you're not living up to your potential. You're too comfortable. So I'm going to leave so that you have to do something that makes you uncomfortable. Right? One of those was approached in a pretty positive way. The other one was in a less positive way in terms of how it went down, the details of which are not hugely important. It was the reaction. and the where we are. Today, I'm still friends with both of those humans, but they both had a huge impact on my life, and again, in different ways, pushing me in a different direction. Because had those two experiences not occurred, I'd probably still be originating. And not that that's a bad place to be, but to one of these gentlemen's point, it was not my fullest potential. I had I had additional gifts that God had given me, that my experiences had built up, that I was able to bring to the table with some changes. I had started in that role, I had started experimenting with innovation and social media. And this was a number of years ago. Social media wasn't really used for any type of advertising. It was really only to connect with your high school friends. And figuring out how to make that work and meeting people along the way that helped me figure it out was absolutely huge. It was something that played a big role in discovering who I am and what I can bring to the table, and opened up a vast world of different things to me. In addition, we went through the financial crisis, had just bought a nice big, had just bought a house, had another kid, and now into the third one, right? And then we had the housing market crashes. And I'm at an organization, and I wake up one morning and I hear on the television that the organization I work for has been acquired by somebody else thanks to a little push from the federal government. You know, that was a big deal. That's a big change in the way that you function and operate. Now, I know that it was a big change for a lot of folks who followed the implodometer and showed up, and there were, chains and padlocks on their doors. We didn't have that. But that was a tough experience for people to go through and understand the difference in the products that were going to be available, how you were going to serve your customers. And people used the tools that we had in different ways. And some people were, let's just say it, irresponsible with how they put folks into homes. Others used those tools in a way that really positively impacted home ownership and the borrowers in their community. But now those tools were no longer available because of what occurred and where the secondary market was. And you had to figure out how you were going to provide business, how you were going to help your customers deal with foreclosures, something that most of us had never really dealt with. We originate the loans, they get sold into the secondary market. We're not out there knocking on doors and collecting. I will say that, working at a bank in North Georgia, I did get to go knock on some doors because we did have some loans that were on our books, which really gives you an appreciation for the underwriting process, the decisions you're trying to make, and the aftermath of what happens and what that responsibility looks like. But most of us had never dealt with that. You go through the financial crisis, and now you have customers who are calling you saying, should I make my payments or send in my keys? So you're serving your community in a different way, particularly for those of us who, and many of the successful originators sell themselves as customers for life, right? We're working with you no matter what happens, whatever questions you have. And now you're dealing with, how do you help guide them through what's arguably the worst time in their life, when they might lose their home?
Yeah. Do you have a process that you go through in times of shakeup like that? Like, you've been through a couple shakeups. We've all gone through some shakeups. What's your process? Do you go into a depression mode and then work through it? Do you go immediately to the front lines, like, let's go fight this thing? What's your natural response?
My natural response is, I'm probably the person you want on the plane next to you, sitting in the emergency exit row, because when a crisis happens, I go into the, how do we fix it? How do we solve it? What do we deal with? I package away any emotions, anything that has to do with it. And it's, how do we solve the crisis at hand? From creating new ways to do business to, figuring out what needs to happen for people's personal lives. But it is, get the spreadsheet, get the 3-ring binder, old school here, map it all out, put the giant Post-it notes on the wall, and really figure out a plan, get that plan executed. I'm the kind of person that after that 26.2 mile marathon, I'm going to collapse at the end. I didn't get a slow start at the beginning because I had to get through it. But when we're done, then all those things come up and you have to deal with them.
So you have a time when you feel like it's first we act, later we feel.
That's my way. I'm not saying it's the best way.
No,
it's certainly the way that I handle it.
Well, how long does that take for you do you fix the problem? The plane's now back on track, and then you're like, okay, now the letdown?
Yeah. For me, that's where it happens.
How long does that take? Like, I imagine it varies, but.
Yeah, it really does depend on the situation. I can think of, a number of situations where it took years for that letdown to occur, and others it takes, a few weeks or a few months. I try to be better today, putting in some things that are self-care, as we've talked about, we've learned. I think COVID did a lot of us, some favors, or I'll at least talk about myself. There was so much going on. We had so much to do, not from just a work standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint. I had, children still at home, though they were high school aged, and a child in college at that time. And the things that they were dealing with and having to have those tough conversations. There's a lot of emotion. For those that don't know, I'm in an interracial marriage, and I have biracial children, and they were dealing with things in a whole different way that I could never just I can't be in their position. I'm not the same person that they are. I don't have the same life experiences, but I'm their mother. I want to be there for them with the things that they're going through. And my children were experiencing it in very different ways.
So you had all three kids were dealing with it like differently?
All three kids dealing with it very differently.
How big was the range from the person doing best to the person doing, like, was it a pretty wide spectrum?
It was a very, very wide spectrum, from one who it really didn't faze them until some things happened at their school that kind of forced the issue. They were feeling really good, very supported, in a good place, to one who really struggled with what was going on and why are people mean to each other, and how can you be mean to this precious, I can remember sitting on the bed watching a video, and she's like, how can people be mean to this 4-year-old? Like, how can they say these things about her or to her?
Wow.
Very challenging conversations.
How did you, talking specifically about that, because you were chief of staff at a large bank during that time, and you're chief of staff at home. How did you manage that? Because I know, so that anybody listening, hears this, they need to hear it out loud right now. You work more hours than I think anybody I know. Like, you sleep like 2 hours a night, and the rest of the time you're working. And that would be home and at work. How did you balance that in a world where there was no travel? There's you and the family. You travel a lot, I think. And now you're home, which everybody knows I didn't do well with that. How did you manage running a bank's mortgage side and then also running the family?
I didn't do well with being at home. I struggled because one of the things, if you know me, I am going to run up and hug you. I may barely know you, but I'm a touchy-feely, want to make you feel good type of human. I thrive on being with other people just like you do. And so going from traveling every week to being at home full time and literally only seeing the 2 humans that lived in my house, that was a struggle for me mentally. Now, in the beginning, there was a lot of work to do. We had the best interest rates of ever in our history, of at least my history of mortgage lending. I think for most of us, that's true. And, we had involvement with PPP loans, and, we were doing the homeschool thing with how to get everything to work. And our school still had sports. So there was a lot going on. And to your point, I generally try to sleep 4 or 5 hours a day. I think I was getting 3 or 4 hours a day at the time. But my support network was really good. I had an amazing boss who understood what people were going through and tried to create space to have those conversations and create opportunities for people to connect. The organization that I worked for, very large lending institution, senior leadership started putting out weekly videos and coordinating with folks so that they could feel like a part of their community. So I worked for an organization that was supportive. I had supportive friends. I had my neighbor and best friend working on the front lines, dealing with COVID, her and her husband, both doctors. We developed a routine where we tried to be safe, as much as you can with the knowledge that you have. Think about this being March, April of that year, as opposed to today with the information that we have. You don't know what you're dealing with. You have to make some estimated guesses. So we would sit outside across a fire pit. And so it was great to have those things, but each person has to figure out what's right for them. And then balancing that on top of what's going on in the mortgage industry. I imagine a lot of folks did what may be my normal course. And even if it wasn't for them, they jumped into all this overtime, all this work to deliver for customers, because that's what we do in this industry. Pretty much everybody I know in this space takes it very seriously, what opportunities we have to deliver home ownership, generational wealth, and make people's lives genuinely better. There's nothing like the feeling of being in your own home versus being in an apartment or a home that is just not yours. I mean, it's a tremendous experience. And I know that everybody I know values what they deliver. They were also watching as other people didn't have any work. They were seeing their friends and family get laid off, maybe even their spouse or partner. There was a lot going on and a lot of emotions. But when you're working, as many hours as you can physically put in, it lets you put that off. And I think for a lot of us in the mortgage space, we were certainly able to put those things off for at least a year, maybe two. And then as the world is recovering, now we're having that letdown. Things are slowing down. People are getting laid off in our industry. Maybe we're getting laid off. And it's a very different emotional experience. The world isn't supporting you the same way that they were in 2020.
I wondered about that as I was going through, for us, we lost all of our live gigs in like 1 week, where every time I picked up the phone, we were losing a seminar. All of my friends like you were crushing it and rates were lower than ever and things are great. And nobody really had time to think about what was happening, because anytime you took to think, you weren't able to, go out there and do deals and get those loans closed. And then I wondered, would there be a letdown at the end of it? Which is what I was really most concerned about. Is I went through my letdown early, and then watching the industry now still to this day going through oh gosh, it really is not great out there. I do wonder how people handle that. Because you're right, that fight right away, like we can do this and come on team, gather together, let's go. When that ends, I just don't know, for you, how did you manage? Because your letdown included not working where you were working anymore, and then having to look at your life and go, okay, what do I want? You had kind of a reboot a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think it was a good experience to go through. We should all go through not being the one necessarily in control of our changes, because I think ultimately we know that really we're not in control of our life. Simon Sinek has a great book, Leaders Eat Last, and he talks about the locus of control. And some people have an internal locus of control and some people have an external locus. And I think for those of us with this internal locus of control, where we feel like we do control things in the world and that the world bends to the work and effort and energy that we put in, right? Not our whims, but the work that we put in, and that we're in control of those circumstances versus circumstances controlling us, that it's hard when you feel like there is something that you didn't get to control, and taking that step back and being forced to deal with it, plus being forced to deal with what's going on in our industry overall. It was a challenge. It was a real challenge. And I will say, I feel so lucky that I had a group of amazing and strong women who supported me through that. Not that I didn't have strong men in my life, but I had recently joined a women's networking group with other senior women leaders from outside of our industry. And having this group of women around me, one, brought perspective, because they weren't all in our industry. So it was, hey, we've been through this, here's what happened, or hey, this is what I see from the outside. And the encouragement and the support to sit down and say, okay, use this as an opportunity. You have the opportunity to sit back and say, I've done so many things in my career, from origination to running operations to, they let me underwrite for a little while. I think that was a bad choice at some level. There was this whole experiment where they let originators underwrite loans.
Oh
right?
my God. How could that go wrong?
Never. There was nothing wrong with that. It was a short pilot. But having done those things, having worked in innovation, having worked in, on the marketing side, not officially in marketing, but doing that lead gen and loan officer development, I've had a breadth of experiences. And it was like, okay, which direction would I want to go if I'm having this amazing opportunity to spend some time? And I literally went and spent just a couple of weeks saying, where do I find the most value? Where do I think I can contribute to the industry, to the organization? I learned something in yoga teacher training. At one point, I did yoga teacher training and became a certified yoga teacher, taught for a number of years, just as a a side gig. But one of the things we said in those classes was, I commit to making myself good. I commit to making each and every one of you good. And I modified the next part to say, for everybody I work with, I commit to making my company good, and I commit to making my industry good. Right? It worked a little different in the yoga studio, but that's how I modified it. And it's something I still say to this day. And I look at it in my annual business plans is, what am I doing to improve myself? What am I doing to improve the people around me? And it can be small. It doesn't have to be ginormous. Sometimes those little things are the best things. What am I doing to make my company good? And what am I doing to make my industry good? And so I sat down and used that framework along with a lot of hard insights from folks around me to say, this is where I think I can really contribute the most. And now with that, armed with that information, it was okay. Now, how do I get that out there and find the opportunities that fit with what I do, what I want to do, and how I feel I can give value back?
I'm going to plug for journaling right now. Like, journaling's one of the best things I do. I mean, it's in my owner's manual. I have to be doing it frequently because it helps me like get stuff out of my head it's messy up there. And so those 4 things you just said, I think everybody who journals, and even those who don't, need to sit down with those 4 questions, right? Because I do think some people focus a lot on what they do to make themselves good, but they don't think of themselves as part of a bigger industry or even part of a bigger company. Others do what they can to make the industry better, but haven't worked on themselves. I think there's not one of those items you mentioned that we can do without, right? So I think everybody should be writing that down right now. Like, even when you said it, I thought, oh, what do I do? And I know the things, right? I have them up here, but getting them down on paper makes me be able to look at it and go, okay, cool. And then find areas where, oh, maybe I could do a little bit more on this side.
And life is, I don't like to use the word balance, but it ebbs and flows. There are some years or some periods of my life where I can give more to our industry. There's some periods where I really have to give it all to my company. And there's sometimes you got to regroup and take care of yourself, and you've got to put more energy into that part of your life. And so every year is not the same. I like to look at it each year and do a checkup kind of mid-year, which is about now for folks who are watching this when it first airs. This is a good time to reassess what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what area of your life might need more attention. I've used an executive coach for years. And one of the things he evaluates is looking at how we're doing in these, I think it's 10 hubs or spokes that we look at. And you draw the dot, like, I'm doing well, 1 to 10. And then you connect those. And in theory, it makes a circle. It almost never makes a circle, right? There's one that's really good. There's one that's really low. And doing this exercise and evaluation of where you are and where you need to personally put time and energy in those spokes and areas of your life really matter. It's difficult. These are not easy exercises. If you do them right, they're some of the hardest things you'll ever do because you have to be truthful to yourself.
All right, I want to end talking about leading as a woman in the mortgage industry. And I come to you as a guy who, I was in a leadership meeting this morning at my company, and everyone on my leadership team is a woman. And in the mortgage industry, that's not normal. Like, we have people come to us and say, why don't you have more women in your videos, or more women featured as leaders in your videos, or interviews with women in the industry? And part of it is, it's finding the women who have been, those strong, powerful women have risen up in the industry against all odds and against the battle that you face and the rooms that you're in. I don't know if you watch Ted Lasso, but when she walks into the room, do you watch it? Please tell me yes. You don't? Oh.
All right, no.
She walks into this room full of football club owners, soccer for those in the United States watching this. And she walks into this room and it's just all these old men. And I just laughed. I'm like, oh, is that a mortgage industry meeting? You've grown up in this world where you had to pave your own way. You had to blaze your own trails in many cases. And I know you've had a very strong mentor who was your boss at your last company. What's that like for those of us who don't know?
Well, I would say a couple of things. So one, I can remember 2 industry events. One was my very first MBA annual. And I go to this event, and I'm going to make up a number. Let's say 10,000 people at this event. And as I walk in, being, low man on the totem pole, not a senior leader, but coming to this event, excited about this being my first foray into kind of the national, getting engaged on the national level. And it felt like, and I know these probably weren't the exact numbers, but it felt like there were 9,997 white men and 3 women.
Wow.
I know that wasn't true, but it's certainly the ratio when you're talking about the number of years ago that this was very true. I can remember the first time that we had Empower, when Marsha pulled together, it wasn't even called Empower then, when Marsha pulled together all the women that were at MBA Annual, and we literally fit in the meeting room of a restaurant. That was every woman that was there. And then my second kind of experience was my first chairman's event, when I got invited to the MBA chairman's event. And it's about 150 senior leaders in the industry. And they started talking about, one gentleman stood up and he started talking about the progression of leadership and how do we ensure that we're doing the right thing to hand it off, right? We have an aging problem in our industry that we don't necessarily train up leaders. And what he said, he goes, look around this room. He goes, we're a bunch of old people. He goes, wait, I won't speak for the women, but there's not that many of you in here either. There's very few women. There were very few minorities. And again, this is a number of years ago. We've dramatically improved. We've made a lot of progress, but it hasn't always been that way. Most dinners that I go to for client dinners, I'm the only woman. Mm-hmm. Besides my high school and college job, I've never had a female boss until I went to work at my last organization, where I had the first, president of mortgage. This is the first time I'd ever worked for a strong and powerful woman, and got to hear her stories and understand what she's had to go through and the different organizations that she's been in. And she's one of the most amazing leaders. I don't want to say female leaders. She's an amazing female leader, but she's one of the most amazing leaders in the industry. She has this drive and charisma, and she's an amazing person. Being able to work side by side with somebody who understands the same struggles that you've had. Maybe they aren't identical, but it's more relatable than, even me having conversations. I'll use my dad as an example. Obviously, my dad loves and cares about me and wants the best for me, but he hasn't been the only in a room. Mm-hmm. And being able to have that, that experience led me to looking for women's mentorship groups. And I ended up joining 2 that have been highly valuable. I've been in them for about 2 years now. And I wouldn't trade those experiences for the world. Having somebody, and a mentor can be anybody. It doesn't have to be somebody you work with. It took me that long to find that person. But there are amazing people out there. And I know that when I was trying to learn social media, I ended up calling somebody that a friend of a friend of a friend, and said, hey, I want to raise my hand. I want to learn about social media. This gentleman knew so much about social media, was a senior executive at a very, very large organization, not in our industry, doesn't know me from Adam. But I pick up the phone and I call him and I said, hey, I have some questions. Can we schedule some time? He was so gracious with his time. And I asked him, why do you do this? Like, what causes, is this something you do regularly? He said, you wouldn't believe. Almost nobody raises their hand and says, can I be mentored? Can you help me? He said, so anybody that raises their hand and actually shows the genuine interest and is not expecting you to do all the work as the mentor. It's not like show up and fix me. If they show up and they raise their hand and they want help, he's like, you wouldn't believe the number of people that would be willing to do that. And I have found that that's true, not only from the people that I've asked, but if somebody comes to me, I started thinking about it when he said it. If somebody comes to me and they have questions and they want help, I'm the first person to say yes and figure out how to throw that extra time slot on my calendar to make it happen for them. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people think you're not serious when you say that you'll do it, but there is an expectation that the person on the other end of that call or video chat comes prepared. They have specific things they want to learn, and then you grow and learn from each other, and it's an amazing experience.
Is there take 25-year-old Christy, compare it to 45-year-old Christy, if you're 45 yet, I don't know. Those two women walk into a room full of senior leaders. What's the biggest difference between the 25-year-old version and the 45-year-old version?
The 25-year-old version isn't worried about the senior leaders. It's everybody is the same. There's a confidence walking in, but it's an uneducated confidence. It's not knowing the way the game is played and not really understanding all the dynamics and how to make the most impact in that room. I'm a little older than 45. We won't talk about how much, but a little older. I've got a big birthday coming up. But the me today goes in and sees the value of building relationships and figuring out the people in the room that I can bring value to. I love the way a friend of mine puts it. He says, there's a difference. Either you walk into the room and you go, hey, here I am. Or you walk into the room and you go, oh, hey, there you are. I want to be the person at 45. I'm the person that walks into the room and says, hey, there you are. How can I help you? What can I do to benefit you? How can I build a relationship? How can I make this event or this organization better? And it's so much more about giving today than it was at 25.
Wow. And I can tell you from my perspective, from the first time I met you, you're the person you walk into the room and you say, I want to get to know that person. Like there she is. And I think that's interesting that you come into the room saying there you are and everybody else goes, oh my gosh, there she is. And it's because of the way that you carry yourself where you have reason to be cocky. Like you've got your track record is very successful. And so you could walk in and be like, yep, I did it. But you never come off that way. It's always your interest in other people and helping people either meet the person that they need to meet there or get what they need to from, your relationship with you, a friendship with you. So it works. It definitely has created a vibe where I think that's a good reason that you're successful is because that's how you do see it. How can I help you? How can I help, anybody in this room? I love that you described it that way, of the confidence of not knowing that, that people are looking at you or that, not just kind of like, hey, let's just, get in here and mix it up versus now going in and going, okay, there's a reason I'm here. There's a strategy, there's a system, and that's honed over time, which is awesome that you've done that. So will we ever see you as president of MBA?
That's a big job. We are so lucky to have had a number of female leaders in that role. They've definitely blazed a path. One of the things to be able to do that is the support of your organization. I've worked for some amazing organizations that allow for people to be involved and engaged in the industry at that level, because it takes an army behind the scenes to allow the person to be on the stage at MBA events because they still have a day job. And there's still a lot of work to get done. So your organization has to be truly supportive of it. So we'll see. Today is not that day. Today is not that opportunity. I'm so excited for the women who are on the ladder and doing the things. And today I'm a background person. I know that my role is to be supportive and to be helpful, to help those people shine, because there's a lot of good work that has to be done at the MBA and other organizations that's behind the scenes, and I'm all in.
Okay, and with the remaining 3 minutes before your next meeting, does your dad know how much of an impact he had on you?
I have told him a number of times that the first session that I did, the first video, back in the day before podcasts and blogs, it was an internal thing that they were doing to interview some senior leaders to share, to kind of get to know you. I actually got a copy of that video and sent it to him because he's had this tremendous impact. I also sent him the one that talks about the impact his mom had on me. Mm-hmm. And what that has meant to my career. My mother's mom had a tremendous impact on me with what she's done. I've got amazing humans in my life. And I am so honored to be able to learn from every interaction that I have with people like you, with the many folks that we know in the industry, and the many amazing humans that I've gotten to work with. I'm a lucky girl.
That's awesome. One of my best friends phrases it perfectly. He says, when you reach the top, send the elevator back down. And it's that help others get to the place that you've gotten to. So you're both getting mentored from great people, but you're also becoming a mentor. You're in a really good spot in life. So Christy, thank you for spending time with me today. You have a meeting in 2 minutes, and then you've got, a ways before you fall asleep and then wake up 3 hours later. So Thank you for spending time with me. Hugely valuable,
Thank you,
and I
Ken.
appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
All right, we'll see you
Bye-bye.
later.